Now, today's Uncle Mike's Story Corner is a little bit different from what usually constitutes Uncle Mike's Story Corner. The reason for the difference, this is more of a history that I'm going to share with you. Yes, a history. Don't run for the exits. It's very interesting because this is a history of MSNBC, the television network. And I found this at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting website, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, which is absolutely merciless in trying to hold so-called journalists or news-gathering organizations accountable for their claims that they are, in fact, journalists. And they do a good job of it, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. So let's get right to it. Now, this is going to be almost a direct quote. Because while I know a bit of the history of MSNBC, I certainly did not know everything that Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting has put together and reported today. So here it is. It's written by Spencer Snyder. The title is After 25 Years, There's a Reason MSNBC Can't Look Back. To mark its 25th anniversary, MSNBC promised, quote, 25 days of forward-looking essays on important issues, end quote, from MSNBC personalities like Rachel Maddow. On July 12th, 2021, a photo of Rachel Maddow was posted to the community tab of MSNBC's YouTube account, and the accompanying text read, quote, to mark MSNBC's 25th anniversary, MSNBC Daily will feature 25 days of forward-looking essays on important issues from MSNBC anchors, hosts, and correspondents. Today, Rachel Maddow writes about the future of election integrity. End quote. Unlike Democracy Now!, which also just celebrated 25 years, or Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, which just reached 35 years, MSNBC isn't commemorating with any looks back to its founding or to its history as an outlet for journalism. This choice might be because, for much of its history, MSNBC wasn't branded as the liberal answer to Fox News. It was instead the ratings-seeking, superfluous product of two megacorporations endeavoring to expand their respective news businesses. To do a full retrospective of the network, one would have to include its record of platforming conservatives, silencing anti-war voices, and being early adopters of round-the-clock scandal coverage. When General Electric owned NBC and Microsoft joined forces in 1996 to create a news network, Microsoft, NBC hadn't quite pinned down its plan for ratings success. In addition to simulcasting the radio host Don Imus, known for his homophobic, racist, and sexist remarks, MSNBC was seeking to cultivate a younger, tech-savvy audience with programming that exploited a nascent World Wide Web. The site, hosted by Soledad O'Brien, and featuring a purple-haired animated AI named Dev Null, was one of its first original programs. This failed to bring in an audience and was canceled in 1997. The channel would soon abandon its tech-focused strategy for more sensational fodder. MSNBC's fixation on Monica Lewinsky helped solidify the saturation coverage model for cable news, and it started in 1998. Once the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke, revolving around Bill Clinton lying about having a sexual relationship with a former White House intern, MSNBC saturated its programming with the story. The Big Show, hosted by Keith Olbermann, was to become White House in Crisis. Olbermann eventually apologized to Bill Clinton for contributing to what John Carmen of the San Francisco Chronicle referred to as, quote, MSNBC's virtually nonstop cacophony of presidential and congressional shame, end quote. This saturation coverage model perhaps pioneered by CNN during the O.J. Simpson case in 1994. But the saturation coverage model would become the rule for cable news. Pick a story of sensation, usually at the expense of substance, and drill it into the ground 24/7 with no angle too stupid to be explored and repeated. The fact that this approach might condition millions of viewers to see trivial things as important while downplaying or completely ignoring more meaningful topics would be of little consequence to the company. After stepping down as FAIR's executive director, Jeff Cohen worked for a time as a producer at MSNBC, and later in his book, Cable News Confidential, described his first day at the network's Secaucus, New Jersey headquarters. Quote, I ventured through the building's central corridor, where 10 framed posters celebrated the heights of MSNBC's early history. The first one I saw, The Funeral of Princess Diana, September 6, 1997. Then, Death of JFK Jr. On the opposite wall, I saw Columbine Shootings, live coverage, and Elian Gonzalez, live coverage, and the Concorde crash. If these were MSNBC's highlights, what were its lowlights? In 1999, a show called Equal Time sought to bring a little balance to the Clinton coverage. It was co-anchored by Cynthia Alksney, a former federal prosecutor, who was to be a pro-Clinton voice on the new program. Who was the other co-host? Iran-Contra operative Oliver North. Also added to their 1999 lineup was Watch It with Laura Ingraham. It was MSNBC that gave the former Clarence Thomas clerk, Laura Ingraham, her first cable platform. It was around that time that MSNBC began to develop its permanent lineup. Chris Matthews joined in 1999, Mika Brzezinski in 2000, and Joe Scarborough in 2003. Not all of its hires were so enduring. Alan Keyes, who ran 3 times to be the Republican presidential nominee and would eventually go on to sue Barack Obama to provide proof that he was born in the U.S., was the host of Alan Keyes is Making Sense. It was short-lived. Then there was Michael Savage, who was offered a platform, the Savage Nation, that he would quickly lose for making viciously homophobic remarks of the sort he was notorious for before MSNBC gave him a show. There was also an entire show devoted to crime news, an overrepresentative genre with a formula that drowns out examining other pressing social ailments. That was called the Abrams Report, and it was hosted by Dan Abrams. The show would end when Abrams became general manager of MSNBC. Abrams failed upwards into the GM position after embarrassingly embracing lies in support of the Iraq invasion, declaring in December of 2002 that, quote, within the past few weeks, Iraq may have sold or given a chemical weapon, possibly nerve gas, to Islamic extremists affiliated with al-Qaeda, end quote. Sourcing this claim to, quote, knowledgeable officials speaking without permission who describe it as a credible report, but not backed up by definitive evidence, end quote. Another host destined for cancellation was Phil Donahue, except in Donahue's case, cancellation wouldn't be the result of saying something bigoted or manifestly false on air, or not being able to maintain ratings. His were the highest on the network. For Donahue, it would come from being an inconvenient anti-war voice in the lead up to the Iraq War. MSNBC worried that Phil Donahue's show would be, quote, a home for the liberal anti-war agenda. At the same time, our competitors are waving the flag at every opportunity, end quote. When Donahue was brought on in 2002, MSNBC was excited for the ratings that he was expected to bring. However, the network quickly began to worry that Donahue would be, quote, a difficult public face for NBC in a time of war, end quote. especially considering that NBC was owned by General Electric, which, among other things, is a weapons manufacturer. Apparently, to compensate for his position, Donahue was told to balance every anti-war guest with 2 pro-war guests, except in the case of filmmaker activist Michael Moore, for whom 3 pro-war voices would be required. Donahue was canceled soon before the invasion of Iraq. Its lead-in show, Countdown Iraq, hosted by Keith Olbermann, was expanded to fill the time slot. This stance on Iraq could be felt permeating the network all the way down to its lowest thirds. In March 2003, George W. Bush gave Saddam Hussein an ultimatum that either he and his sons would leave Iraq within 48 hours or face war. MSNBC ran a countdown clock at the bottom of the screen. This, of course, added to the lie that war was not a choice, but a consequence of a defiant Saddam. As the war progressed, perhaps to make Joe Scarborough and Chris Matthews seem liberal by comparison, MSNBC hired Tucker Carlson. He held a primetime spot from 2005 until 2008, during which time it was the channel's interest to build his brand and make him as well known as possible. Doubtless, MSNBC bears culpability for Carlson's ascendancy. 2008 is when MSNBC became the network we think of today, with the hiring of Air America host Rachel Maddow to head a new show in prime time. This would complement Keith Olbermann, whose ratings had almost doubled since 2006, when he started delivering special comments criticizing the Bush administration. Countdown with Keith Olbermann would air at 8 p.m. and replay at 10 p.m. because the repeat garnered sufficient ratings to justify the redundancy. This began an era when it was possible to find people like Amy Goodman or Jeremy Scahill on one of MSNBC's panel shows. Chris Hayes, Rachel Maddow, and Lawrence O'Donnell, for all their faults, were far cries from the days of Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham. However, the new host's leftism seldom extended beyond standard mainstream discourse, particularly when it came to U.S. foreign policy. Maddow told the New York Times in July of 2008, quote, "I'm a national security liberal, which I tell people because it's meant to sound absurd. I'm all about counterterrorism. I'm all about the GI Bill," end quote. In 2009, when the president of Honduras, Manuel Zelaya, was ousted by a military coup, the coverage was characteristically scant. Maddow framed the coup as more of a curiosity than a crisis. While some of her coverage focused on the Republicans who planned trips to Honduras in order to support the coup government, other of her segments poked fun at Zelaya's attempts to re-enter the country. The fact that the Honduran military opened fire on supporters of Zelaya awaiting his return at the airport, killing a teenage boy, was not part of Maddow's look at the lighter side of overthrowing an elected government. When the U.S. was set to initiate war with Libya in 2011, as opposed to reporting critically on the burgeoning conflict, MSNBC served partly as a cover to the Obama administration. Michael Corcoran and Stephen Maher wrote in Truth Out in June of 2011, quote, "Maddow observed that Obama, like Bush, was invading a Middle Eastern nation." They went on to say, quote, "But by initiating the attack without so much as a press conference to the American people," Maddow argued, he, Obama, was avoiding the chest thumping of previous administrations in an effort to change the narrative of U.S. foreign policy, end quote. Also in 2011, Keith Olbermann was fired despite heavy ratings. Denials were issued that this had anything to do with the purchase of MSNBC and NBC by the cable giant Comcast. The Atlantic magazine speculated that Olbermann might have been ousted for arguing that a mass shooting in Tucson that former Republican vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin needed to be repudiated for amplifying violence. Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks was given the 6 p.m. slot that same year. His ratings were good. However, sometime after being told to tone it down and invite on more Republicans, it became clear that despite Uygur's ratings haul, there was no upward mobility for his brand of vigorous criticism. He soon left MSNBC. Ed Schultz was also part of the progressive wave that came to characterize the network post-2008. He was on air from 2009 to 2015. His end came when he was about to cover Bernie Sanders' 2015 presidential primary launch. At the launch event, Schultz was contacted by network president Phil Griffin and told to pack up and leave. The network was not interested in covering the Sanders campaign launch. Schultz was gone from the network soon after. While MSNBC failed to give equal time to progressive candidates, it found inordinate bandwidth to devote to presidential candidate Donald Trump, contributing to the $2 billion in so-called earned media that Trump received during his 2016 campaign. During the 2016 election cycle, MSNBC mentioned him more than all other presidential candidates, Democratic or Republican combined. An episode in May 2016 typified MSNBC's obsession with Trump, while also displaying how truly similar they are to the other cable news networks. While Hillary Clinton was giving a talk to union workers in Las Vegas, MSNBC, as well as Fox and CNN, chose instead to air footage of an empty podium waiting where Trump was scheduled to speak. A comparison of yearly screen time MSNBC gave to Barack Obama versus Donald Trump from the Stanford Cable TV Analyzer. Note that in 2015, MSNBC gave slightly more coverage to a real estate developer who was planning to run for president the following year than it did to the sitting president of the United States. After the 2016 election, Trump continued to dominate MSNBC. The Stanford Cable News Analyzer indicates that the network gave Trump roughly 2.5 times as much screen time from 2017 to 2020 as it gave Barack Obama from 2013 to 2016. As the Columbia Journalism Review noted in September of 2020, the network that consistently gives Trump the most airtime is not Fox News, but MSNBC. And this attention paid to Trump was highly selective, with vast amounts of news hours devoted to connections he may or may not have had with Russia. According to Columbia Journalism Review of October 2019, this, quote, between Election Day 2016 and April 19, 2019, MSNBC devoted 32% of all coverage to the Trump-Russia collusion scandal, end quote. This obsessive focus invariably crowded out countless other stories that may have been more important to voters, but with less utility to the network as drivers of viewers and watch hours. The passage of Trump's massive tax cut for the wealthy, for example, was virtually eclipsed by MSNBC's exhaustive examination of the minutiae of the Mueller report and the so-called Russia dossier. A large portion of MSNBC's existence is characterized by a lust for ratings, endless coverage of trivialities, and a craven echoing of officialdom. It may occasionally have a good take, good segment, or even a good host, but it will always be operating in service to profit and corporate power. Woohoo! A history that the reason MSNBC does not want to look back, as I think it was in July, they celebrated their 25th year. I think they came on the air Let me see here. I have it down here. Yeah, July 15th in 1996. Personally, I like MSNBC and knowing and understanding its corporate makeup, its slant, its view on reporting. And it's obviously there's a definite leftist or small d democratic slant, especially given the tempo of these times, to what MSNBC's program hosts present. That goes without saying, although I just said it. But even knowing of the absolute bias on MSNBC, it happens to be my personal bias, right? For most of the programming. And I realize that I have been advised many, many times, as I'm sure you have, listen to the other side for a change. Listen to your supposed enemy. Listen to what they have to say. And my answer to that is get fucking serious. I mean, come on. I'm going to listen to the scum, the swine, the filth that comes out of the Fox sewer or One American News, Onan News, or any of these other toilets. No, I don't think so. I don't need to. I am too old to have to listen to two sides of an argument that is not really an argument. It's a concoction of bullshit that the right wing, the Christian fascists, have put together and present as a political philosophy. I don't have to listen to that because I know what it is. I know exactly what it is. I know why it was produced, what it represents, and why I want to stay as far away from that kind of craziness as I possibly can. It's no longer, truth seekers, an idea of, well, on this hand, yada, 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 but on the other hand, yada, yada, yada. Bullshit. That doesn't hold any longer. And regardless of how what I'm saying right this moment sounds as being very one-sided, it is nothing but absolute truth. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcast. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.